Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel and we try to take our audience through a little tour of some great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, cosmologies, also magnum opuses and tour de forces, earth-shattering discoveries from obscure sources. And we hope that this will help you out with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview, your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health. And today is our 245th video under the unit of the Reciprocal Church, which is named after Dewey B. Larson and his great theory of everything called the reciprocal system of theory. I've got about 600 videos on that on this channel, or at least on the BitChute and YouTube channels. And I tend to try to present very difficult works, but I try to hold your hand through them. As a person who had to go through these without anybody helping them, I'm trying to serve as your guide. You have to do the work, but I can at least, you can kind of mark my footsteps, so to speak, and, maybe avoid some of the cul-de-sacs that I went down. And also just to kind of give you the context for the writing, historical context, fit it in, how to fit it into your own system. But what we're trying to do is put together spiritual resources, things that you can use in your own life to, get closer to what you consider to be the divine, whether that's just higher consciousness or whether that is some kind of God with a capital G or a small g or a plural or singular or, however you conceive of it, but just ways to experience and to get closer. And we feel like this is necessary because of the impending doom that awaits the Western religions. All three of the Western religions, I believe, have been discredited, debunked, and basically thrown off a cliff, but they just haven't landed yet. When they do, there's going to be utter chaos out there, and we're going to need some replacements. And, I try not to ever really criticize anything until I have a replacement for it. And so we've spent about 180 videos, 175 videos, putting at least the skeletons of a replacement in. And for the last 60 or so videos, maybe 70, we have been showing you the need, the urgency, by presenting the New Testament and in particular the decoding the New Testament so that you can see the fraudulent basis. What you discover without even doing a terribly deep dive on the Bible, especially the New Testament. Most people, when they think they're going to do a deep dive of the Bible, they read the Bible. Well, that's a start, and that's how I started. In trying to do a deep dive, but realize that eventually the deep dive includes, you have to be able to figure out what is the Bible, not what does the Bible say, but what is it? Where did it come from? Who wrote it and why? These are the questions that need to be asked. And when that is asked, the glaring, obvious answer is that the New Testament was written by the Romans. The Roman Caesars wrote the New Testament just like they wrote every other book that was written in the first century and second century and first century BC, all of this stuff is not to be taken seriously. It is all propaganda. All of the works of all of these authors from this time period, they're all propaganda coming from the Roman Caesars and their, court historians or their court poets or their court, rhetoricians or whoever. These are not to be taken at face value. And in fact, the Romans by the West are not taken at face value. If you read Tacitus or you read Cicero or, Cicero the Younger, or you read Pliny the Younger, or you read Roman mythology or Greek mythology or Norse mythology or Indian mythology, Egyptian mythology. You don't read it and say, oh, this is the truth. This is what happened. This is literally how it went down. But for some reason, when you read the New Testament, you say, oh, this is the truth. This is what they meant. This is what really happened. It's absurd. No, it's not. You have to read it in the same way that you're going to be reading mythology or literature of the period. That, okay, well, it might be conveying certain messages, but it probably is being conveyed by somebody who has some kind of agenda, particularly if it's coming from the Roman Caesars, who were like the masters of propaganda. So, how do we approach this then, if we're going to try to figure out who wrote it? Well, the first clue is, when you give the criticism to a Christian that, well, there is absolutely no evidence for the existence of Jesus. Nobody other than the Gospels ever even allude to the existence of Jesus. They'll tell you, oh yes, well, he's been written about by Josephus. Josephus wrote about, mentioned Jesus by name. And even in the second century, there were a few others. So Suetonius and Tacitus and Pliny and Trajan had all mentioned Jesus. They're from the second century. Josephus is really the only one from the first century. And that's usually enough to satisfy the Christians that, yes, this is backed up by, other non-Christian sources. But what they're not recognizing is that each one of those people is an in-tight member of the Roman imperial court. They are all either kings, Caesars, or very close associates with them. Josephus, if you read his autobiography, it tells you that he was a Jew, and that he was one of the Jewish generals. He was first a holy man and then became a Jewish general who fought against the Romans in the war against the Jews from 66 to 73 AD. And then he realized that the Jews had no chance of winning. He was captured, or he surrendered, and he would surrender to General Vespasian, who eventually became the emperor. He then, as soon as he surrendered, Josephus said he had an epiphany that God now favors the Romans and not the Jews. And so he defected to the Romans. He gave Vespasian the star prophecy saying that I am a prophet and I predict that one day you will become emperor. One day, a couple years later, Vespasian did become emperor. He appointed his son Titus to be the new general, and he went to Rome to become emperor. As he did so, he stopped and he pardoned Josephus, and he adopted him as a member of his family for showing appreciation, for encouraging him to become emperor, for prophesying that he'd become emperor. So Josephus was a member of the royal family. They're called the Flavian dynasty. And that starts with Vespasian in 69 AD. And Titus, his son, the general, eventually became the next emperor in the Flavian dynasty, and then the brother Domitian also, 69 and 96 AD. These Josephus, his name was Flavius Josephus. He became one of the Flavians. And he had a villa at Rome where he was allowed to stay indefinitely, and he wrote all of his works there at Rome. So when he says that he refers to Jesus, you can't possibly believe him. Okay? He's not. He's got. There's a reason why he's telling you that, and it's not because it's the truth. And the same is true for all these other people. Tacitus is a very close friend and possibly actually was one of the emperors. Same with Suetonius. Same with Pliny. So that's not to be taken seriously. But what's more is that if you actually read Josephus, you discover very quickly that whoever wrote Josephus, or whether it was somebody else under that guise, or whether it was a team of writers, because it probably did take a team, because you had, in order to write, you had to have a lot of, research. But whoever wrote Josephus also wrote the Gospels. There are too many parallels between the two, and those parallels have been delved into more than anyone else by this author, Michael Menescotts. And we're going over his book called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. But he is not the first person to believe that the Romans wrote the Gospels. I can list at least, 10 scholars from the past who have known this, and maybe 100 writers from the past, very famous novelists, authors, who also were clued into this and put their message out in code. You have to remember that, the Romans became the Roman Catholic Church. And so they had pretty much a lockdown on information, and you couldn't really put this out there unless it was covered in code. And but if you look at the works of William Shakespeare or Tolstoy or Emerson or Poe or Shelley, all of these people knew the truth, and they tried to express it. In modern days, also Tolkien and C.S. Lewis also knew the game. And I think there's a lot of people alive today that also know that this is the truth. But it's just starting to come out in overt form in books, starting with Bruno Bauer's work in the late 1870s. A lot of Oxford professors in the early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century. Then in this century, Abelard Reuchlin, however you pronounce his name, and in the 20th century. And then now in the 21st century, we've got Joseph Atwill with his two books, Caesar's Messiah and Shakespeare's Secret Messiah, and Henry Davis's Creating Christianity, and There's one more that I'm forgetting right now, but it's also very good. Roman Piso's work out on academia, and now Menescot's. Now, what Menescot's does is he focuses on the book of Luke, and he focuses on Wars of the Jews by Josephus. He sets up a graph with the book of Luke, and it's 24 chapters on the vertical axis. He sets up the Wars of the Jews, and it's 694 paragraphs on the horizontal axis. Every time he finds a parallel, he puts a dot in its appropriate spot, plots the point. And after he's done, he finds that the Romans have signed their names to the book of Luke. Not only do they, have 250 parallels just from the book of Luke, but they fit into a pattern that forms 5 Latin letters. They sign their names, or at least their initials, to the book of Luke. And that plot is on the thumbnail for this video, so you can take a look at that. That's pretty much the graph that he goes with. In his book, he shows you all of the parallels one at a time and plots the points as he goes along, every 5 or so or something. And you can follow along at home. You can get your Josephus PDF on the internet for free. You can put it next to your book of Luke, and you can read these for yourself. But we're going to continue to go through these parallels. Now, we're just doing this. I don't believe we completed it, the analysis, but what's amazing is how intricate some of these parallels are and how well hidden they are. Some of them are obvious, some of them are a little weak, but most of them are pretty robust. They have several parallels that are not coincidental, and they are well hidden. Sometimes they can be right in front of your face and you don't really notice them until you think about it. This was a game that the Romans played and other ancient people. They loved these word games, these puns, these riddles. So we're looking at Jewish War 633, book 6, chapter 6, verse 2, paragraph 2. Titus arranged an interpreter. As he spoke, the interpreter called out to the walls. Well, that's Titus arranged an interpreter. On 3 occasions, Titus exhorted John to peace. John was the Jewish leader, one of the Jewish leaders, military-wise in the war. He's one of the zealots. He exhorted John to peace and was refused each time. On 3 occasions, he exhorted John to peace, but he was refused each time. Titus says his father, Vespasian, did not come to punish them for what they did under Cestius, which occurred earlier, where the Jews attacked Gallus, attacked Cestius had actually sent Gallus, who the Jews had attacked, thereby starting the war. So that was at the start of the war. That was what started the war. And Gallus means cockerel. Okay, saying he came to Galilee. So he did not come to punish, his father, Vespasian, did not come to punish for what they did under Cestius. And then saying he came to Galilee. And they offered to come out and go to the desert. But Titus decided to kill them all instead, mocking them and describing them repeatedly as miserable wretches. Okay, now we go to the book of Luke. Luke 22, chapter 22, verse 59. In Jerusalem, again, the same location. The parallels are always or at least mostly always in the same location. And what Jesus usually predicts, or sometimes does, in the Gospels is what Josephus or Titus, what Titus actually does. So Titus is really like the second Titus is written as the second coming of Jesus, in a very grim, mocking set of parallels. Okay, in Jerusalem, they saw Peter and said, "He is a Galilean." That was the third episode. They saw Peter and said, "He is a Galilean," and Peter denied it. And immediately while he spoke, the cock crew. You remember the word of the Lord, how he had said before the cockerel, which is also known as Gallus, written in the Wars of the Jews, before the cockerel crows, you will deny me 3 times. And remember that happened to Titus. Titus exhorted John to peace 3 times and was refused each time. You shall deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. And the men that held Jesus mocked him and smote him, which is what Titus does to them in the desert. They went out in the desert. Titus decided to kill them all instead, mocking them and describing them repeatedly as miserable wretches. So there's really like 4 pretty specific parallels in those short passages. Now, the next parallel is this is from the text. This next parallel is fairly obvious, since both stories have a Jesus removing or destroying the famous curtain in Jerusalem's holy temple. This is the veil which prevented people from seeing into the empty room in the holy temple, which the Jewish God was believed to physically reside in. Add to this the breaking of rocks and graves in both stories, and the line is and the link is fairly transparent. Okay. Now let's check out this next parallel. I'm just shifting the page here. Jewish War, paragraph 641. That is book 6, chapter 8, paragraph 3. A priest called Jesus. Okay, just for clarification, in Josephus's War of the Jews, there are, I think, either 6 or 7 characters named Jesus. And each one of them, in its own way, parodies the Jesus in the Gospels. Now, one person might, complain that, well, that doesn't mean that the Gospels aren't true. Josephus could have written it afterward and parodied the Gospels. But that's not quite how it works, because they parallel each other. There are times where the book of Luke is actually parodying the Jewish War, as if the book of Luke was written later. The unescapable conclusion of that is that they were written at the same time by the same people. They were bouncing off each other. So a priest called Jesus removed the veil of the temple of Jerusalem and other sacred items to prove them to Titus, to give them to Titus. And then 6 paragraphs later, it says, the Romans entered Jerusalem and broke up the ground, and where they found 2,000 people slain, partly by their own hand and one another, but chiefly by the famine. And some would go in among the heaps of dead bodies and tread on them for a great deal of treasure, was in these caverns. Okay. Now we go to the book of Luke, chapter 23, verse 45. At the death of Jesus, the veil of the temple of Jerusalem was torn, and the veil of the temple was rent, and the rocks were rent, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose and appeared unto many. Okay, so graves of many people broken open, and in one story, the saints arose and appeared to many, and in the other case, their bodies were disturbed and rifled through for treasure. And this is at the death of Jesus, and a priest called Jesus was removed the veil of the temple. That's the curtain, and so that happens also in Luke, where the curtain was torn, and rocks were rent in both situations also. Jonathan broke up the ground, and there they found the 2,200 people. In Luke, the rocks were rent and the graves were open. So that same thing happens in both of those two parallels. Again, it's not like a profound parallel, but it is a parallel that you can't deny if you're looking for it. You might not see it if you're not looking for it, but the Romans were looking for it, you know, so it's kind of like an inside joke. The Romans get the joke, but if you're kind of not savvy, and especially if you're just having this read to you and you can't read yourself, you're probably going to miss the parallels. So that was, you know, that was a good part of the game, is that we get it, but you don't. It's somewhat of a inside joke, but also a mockery. We'll see that more as we continue to go. The next parallel is quite famous. Jewish war describes the absolutely total leveling of Jerusalem, barring one wall and 3 towers, which is exactly that the Gospels claim Jesus had predicted. Exactly what the Gospels claim Jesus had predicted. So, go to Jewish war. This is paragraph 649, book 7, chapter 1, paragraph 1. And gave orders, I guess this is Titus. Titus gave orders to leave Jerusalem entirely leveled, such as to leave future visitors no grounds for believing that it had ever been inhabited. And Luke 21, verse 5, the days will come in which there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Okay, so it's a parallel. It's not much of one. You know, it's similar. You know, it's the Temple of Jerusalem being demolished with not one stone left, you know, to turn over. So in one case, no grounds for believing that it had ever been inhabited. And in the other, you know, not one stone unturned. Or it says, shall be not left one stone upon another. Okay. Now his analysis here says, but I think there's a hidden message. Jewish war describes that the city was leveled such that people would not believe it had been inhabited. However, the Jews of the time had believed that their God physically resided there. So this offers a thinly veiled attack on the Jewish religion. It is suggesting that the Holy Temple had not actually been inhabited by the Jewish God at all. Therefore, that the Jewish religion of the time was false. This is very compatible with the Gospels being designed to help drive secrecy cult initiates to pure emperor worship. Now, again, according to his argument, the purpose of the Gospels was to subdue the Jews, because the Jews were revolting all the time and leading up to this war, and so they wanted to propose a Jewish leader and savior who was a prince of peace, who believed in turning the other cheek and in rendering under Caesar what is Caesar's, and to walk an extra mile with the Roman soldier's backpack, and to basically, turn the other cheek, to, accept your own situation in life. And also to get rid of all these kosher laws and these circumcision laws and these sacrifice laws that made the Romans, made them not, capitulate to the Romans. And then they also, he says that they wanted to start with a Jewish hero of Jesus, then a Jewish savior of Jesus, and then recognize that actually Jesus is actually just a prophet for Titus. And Titus is the second coming of Jesus, and so it's really Titus that we're worshiping. And then eventually they learn that the Jesus story is fake, and that puts them into pure emperor worship. Now, a few paragraphs later, we have another parallel which relies on religious symbolism. Later, I will demonstrate that there are more fiery hidden messages which aim to equate the Jewish leadership with Satan, which is one reason that I note a connection between Satan and the Jewish leader, rising from a cavern under the ground. Okay, so look forward to that, and tune in next time as we continue. Thanks for tuning in today.